Just to kind of review what we've been at in Hebrews chapter 13, we're at the last major section. Next week, we're going to finish it off, the rest of chapter 13, with looking at basically just the benediction, and that's the end of the book. So this is the last section there, and we can summarize it the same way we had the past couple weeks. The new covenant impacts our relationships, takes us through all through verse 19. So tonight specifically, we'll be reading from verses 15 through 19. And can I have somebody read this?
I'll read. I can read that close.
Go ahead, Jason.
Through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that openly profess his name. And do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifices God is pleased. Have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority, because they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. Do this so that their work will be a joy, not a burden, for that would be of no benefit to you. Pray for us. We are sure that we have a clear conscience and desire to live honorably in every way. I particularly urge you to pray so that I may be restored to you soon.
All right, so this is the kind of the last things that he wants to talk about before the benediction. And I think when we get to points like this in books, oftentimes we just kind of skip over them. Like 1 Corinthians, I mean, we're all aware of the parts where he's talking about the conflicts and stuff, but if we just stop and say, hey, after he's done talking about the gifts of the Spirit, what does he talk about at the very end of the book before he closes it out? Nobody remembers that. Or the book of Romans, he's talking about how the Jews, what place the Jews have in predestination, all this different stuff. And it's like, oh, these big concepts. And so you get to the end of the book, and what's the end of the book about? What does it say in the last chapter? Nobody knows. Nobody remembers that. We know that 13 says something about governments, but then 14 is like, I have no idea. Is there even a chapter 14? And so that's this kind of same thing that happens here in Hebrews. We're aware that most of the book is talked about, in large part, the sacrifices in the Old Testament, how it relates to the New Testament, and Jesus, and that kind of stuff. And what is here, nobody really pays attention to these. So let's kind of slow down a little bit and then look at these. Starting in verse 15, it says, through Jesus, therefore. So right there, remember, whenever there's a therefore, look to see what it's there for. And in this case, you'll remember what we've been looking at the past couple weeks. So since we have an enduring city, since Jesus' blood covers us and all that stuff that he was talking about in the previous verses, let us do this. Let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise. So the same as we have our own eternal city and an altar the Jews can't eat from, which we looked at in verses 10 through 14, in that same way we also have our own sacrifices apart from the sacrifices that the Jews had. So obviously we know the sacrifices they had with the animals and all that different stuff, but our sacrifices look a lot different than the Jews did. And we offer them through, he's going to give us two things specifically, but we offer them, it says here, the fruit, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of, I'm sorry, right here. Through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer. And when he says that we offer them through Jesus, basically what that means is our faith in Jesus makes them presentable. As we are offering, it's not something we do just because it's good enough, like if we do good works. It's because we believe in Jesus. And this is one of the things that separates Christianity from, basic humanitarianism, is in humanitarianism, there's the idea that if I'm a good person, I do good things, everything's good, and the divine essence will have to accept me. But in Christianity, it's more of, even if we offer a good sacrifice without a good heart, it's not a good sacrifice. So he gives us two different things that are, the first thing, we have our own city, altar, and sacrifice. I forgot to go to that one. I'm used to Grace and Shane doing this for me. So, sorry. And then, so the first thing that he says there is praise. The first sacrifice that he mentions is praise. And it says here, and through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that openly profess his name. Now, this is actually a reference to Leviticus chapter 7, verse 12. And you might say, now, hold on, isn't Leviticus written in Hebrew and Hebrew written in Greek? Well, yes, and you would be right in that. But you have to remember that the Hebrews of this time period used a Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, which was called the Septuagint. And so that's why I say this is referencing that. It's referencing the Greek version of Leviticus 7:12. So maybe I should have led with that. But, okay. And in Leviticus 7:12, he's talking about a type of fellowship, also called a peace offering, which is given. It's kind of like the highest one to show thankfulness. And it was something that was given when they were already clean. The fellowship offering is not one that you give to make yourself clean or anything like that. It's one that you give for the sole reason of showing gratefulness to God. And it says here, if they offer it as an expression of thankfulness, then along with this thank offering, they are to, and it goes on through the rest, but I just wanted you to see kind of the wording there in the Septuagint is reminiscent. So anyways, and then it says, the fruit of lips that openly profess his name. Now, basically, by saying fruit of the lips, what all these really saying is the result of truly being Christian, the confession, And by confession, I mean not a moment like I confess Jesus, but a lifestyle of a confession to Jesus. And this here, when it says, offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that openly profess his name, this is very reminiscent of the Psalms, which I'm sure you guys will all remember hearing things that are very similar to that. So with that being said, the praise that he is talking about continually offering doesn't just include songs, it includes prayers and songs, just like it did in the book of Psalms. So then in verse 16 it goes on to give us the second one of the sacrifices. It says, and do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifices God is pleased. Do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifices God is pleased. So that takes us to the second of the sacrifices. The first one was praise, the second one is good deeds. And specifically by good deeds, there's two things that he kind of clarifies or spells out here. The first is do not forget to do good deeds, or good, and so that's like good generally speaking. As far as if you just, maybe a good example of this would be just remember the things earlier in the book that he talked about. They should keep on doing these things, I can't remember everything right now, but as we went through the books, there were a few times that he said specifically, don't forget to do this and do this, and kind of love and care for each other. And so that would be good generally. But then he also says this, do not forget to do good and to share with others. And by sharing, he's drawing emphasis to the idea of the church being connected in their community, of actually caring for one another's needs. And so both of these sacrifices then are pleasing to God. It says there, for with such sacrifices God is pleased. And so I want to draw attention to that again. This is because we have been accepted that these sacrifices are pleasing to God. It's not something that we do to buy God off and, make him where he kind of has to listen to us because we did the good thing, So then going on to verse 17. It says, have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority because they keep watch over you as those who must give. Now, there's two basic ways of kind of looking at the outline of this section, which started, I think, in verse 7 and goes through here because I said it was talking about leadership, and it is talking about leadership. So there's basically two ways of looking at that. He talks about remember the past leaders, that they were a good example, and then he kind of corrects the negative leaders that are teaching wrong things, and then he goes to talking about current leaders. That's a simple way of looking at it, but if you're somebody who just likes things overly complicated, you could break it down even further, and you could say he starts talking about the past leaders, how you remember their examples, and then he starts giving an answer to those persuading you away from their example, which would have been the negative leaders. And then he goes on to talking about Christ, the leader of the sacrifices, and then our sacrifices as our leadership leading away from Judaism into Christ, and then going on to the present leaders. I think that one's a little bit too complicated, but teach their own. He says here, have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority. So the NIV reads a little bit different than the CSB. It says here, have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority. CSB says obey and submit, which I think really kind of gets the idea across more. I'll kind of break that down. Sometimes, and I don't want to get too much into this because this is kind of a rabbit trail, but sometimes in other languages, they'll say things in twos to kind of give a more distinct purpose than they would have otherwise. So when they combine words like obey and submit, it's kind of giving it a different idea as a whole that one word wouldn't have really gotten. We don't really do that in English, so it's kind of hard to kind of get across what I'm trying to say, but I guess that's the simplest way I can say it. Two words used in combination can give a different meaning, and we'll just leave it there. So by him saying obey and submit, the idea is to, I'm sorry, I didn't finish reading the rest of the verse, but I'll go back to it. The idea of obeying and submitting together is one of kind of just be ready to comply. And what's meant by that is there's some issue, and he doesn't really go in a whole lot of explanation here, but there's some issue going on in this church where there's kind of some I don't know how to say it, some riled feathers between the leadership and the church. They're just not, whatever's happening, they're not getting wrong. So the contrast here would be ready to comply rather than being defensive and instigative. So whatever squabble is there, he's trying to correct it and saying, hey, look, we've talked about the theology, which is what they've been teaching you. So, you guys don't make their job harder than it needs to be. They're teaching you the truth. And so then he says, have confidence in your leaders to submit to their authority because they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. So with that, when it says watch over, because they keep watch over you, the idea here is, well, how? How do they keep watch over you? Well, one of the big things which people have kind of gotten a little bit away in the modern era, but in the ancient world church, one of the main things that pastors did was correcting and teaching specifically. Nowadays, people go online and they kind of get a lot of stuff from just going from source to source. They'll have a devotional here or whatever, and there's kind of not the same idea of the authority structure in the modern church as there was in the ancient church. But one of the main roles that they did, especially back then, it's still our job now, it's just one that people don't really take serious, is that of being correcting and teaching. So you can kind of start to see how this fleshes itself out. There's some issue, they're wanting to go back to Judaism, there's some issues that are developing between the leadership, and the leadership is trying to correct it, they're trying to teach, and the people are just kind of not really going along with it. There's kind of some friction. So then whoever wrote the book of Hebrews writes this letter to try and support the church and get it to work its problems out and move on. And it just doesn't really work. Well, I guess we don't really know if it works, but it hasn't not been working, I should say. So when it says watch over, what those words there mean basically is to be alert or to be awake, so that you could say that they're watching out for the people, because they keep watch over you. They are watching out for you as those who must give an account. Also, this is a warning to the leaders as well. It's kind of a double-edged sword. It's not just something telling the people to get in line. It's also a warning to the leaders, saying, "Hey, do this so that." I'm sorry, I missed it. Keep watch over you as those who must give an account. So basically, if you are an immoral leader, this is what you hear. You have to give an account of your immorality. And so the people who are submitting to you, knowing that you are not doing your job, God's going to hold them guiltless, and you as a leader, he's going to hold you doubly, in trouble, to put it in different words. Whereas if the leader is doing the right thing and the people under them are not, it's the immoral church instead of the moral leader, you have a little bit of a different issue. And as they're giving an account, it's more of your butt on the line. So it's a good thing or a bad thing depending on which side of the problem you're at. I'll skip that. Not all positions are equal. Church governance works a lot different sometimes than human governance. I'll skip that. Okay, so then he goes here and says, do this so that their work will be a joy and not a burden. So with joy, the thing that blows me away as a pastor is how many times that you're dealing with situations and people think that they're getting back at you. You know what I mean? And they're not, though. Like, here's a good example. A lot of times people will stop tithing to kind of get back at the pastor. I don't check who tithes. Like, I have no idea. So if somebody does this to try, I don't even know. Like, I would never find out about that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not sitting in my office like, okay, let's go over, what's going on here. And, oh, Chris, what's going on here? Oh, well, Jason over here. I don't know. But people still do it. It kind of blows me away. And then the other thing is, when they do these things to try to be spiteful, they think that they're really pulling one over on the church and proving a point. But it says right here that they're actually hurting themselves. Do this so that their work will be a joy, not a burden, for that would be of no benefit to you. It says nothing about whether it's bad for anybody else. So being a troublemaker hurts you. There's lots of different ways, but I made a short list here. Ministry is less profitable because there's internal squabbles. God's people aren't benefited because there's a squabble in the way. You are not growing because you're kind of holding yourself aloof. And the leaders endure emotional stress, so really nobody's winning. And so it says there, be a joy, not a burden. Other translations say without grief. And the idea here is it. I'll just say it like this: there is a totally different thing that happens when you, as a leader, are dealing with people who have a good attitude versus people who have a bad attitude. And not all churches are the same. There are some churches who are just troubled churches, that they're just like problem after problem. And there's other ones that just they're not. They're not. And when you're dealing with those kinds of things, you as the pastor, you have to do your job either way. Sometimes it's not so great, but what I'm getting at here is people sometimes try to make it like they're attacking you as a leader, and it's not just pastors; it's other things like youth leaders and whatnot. The whole time they're just kind of picking on yourself, and it's a whole different ballgame when you are not going through that grief as a leader. It's a whole different experience. Now leadership is hard. Leadership is hard, but it's harder with problem people. And there's something that somebody used to say, a pastor told me once, and I didn't believe it until years passed. And time makes fools of us all. And I'm telling you guys this because Wednesday night, I wouldn't say this on a Sunday morning because Sunday morning is more basic for everybody, for families. Wednesday night is more meant to be a discipleship thing, a next step, something bigger and more substantial. So I think that this is the right place to say weightier things like this. And that's this, that some people are unpastorable. Now, why am I telling you that? Because in case any of you go into a ministry position in the future where you're, over a certain thing, there are going to be people who are just they're just unpastorable. And with that being said, how do you deal with that if you ever find yourself in that situation? And this sounds heartless, but I'm just going to say it. All right? Don't waste your time on them. And you might say, what do you mean by that? Well, if you remember Jesus when he's, sending his disciples out, he said, hey, when you come to a place and they reject you, just keep going. What we do is we keep trying to force somebody to change. And so rather than ministering to the people who actually need or want our help, we focus all of our attention and efforts on the people who hate us. And then we're tired and exhausted by the end of it. And so I say that to some people are just unpastorable. Don't waste your time on them. Move on to the people God has called you to. Rather than whining about the people who you wish were in your life as your ministry, be grateful for the people that God has given you in your life as a ministry. This is one of the reasons why I'm not overly losing sleep about the size of the church, because God has given me people to care for. See what I mean? And yes, I do wish the church had already started to grow. I knew that it wouldn't at this point. We're too early in. But, you get what I'm saying. Moving on. They leave and wear you out. And human tendency is always to throw yourself against a brick wall over and over and over again. So just remember that if you're ever in a position of trying to work through a problem person, remember that. There are things that you can win and some things you cannot win. So we get to the last couple verses here. You can't lead those who don't want to follow. Yes. Well said, computer. Well said. So then verses 18 and 19 says, pray for us. We are sure that we have a clear conscience and desire to live honorably in every way. So we'll start with that before we go to verse 19. Pray for us, the writer or writers. It's more of the, what's called the Arthurian us. Instead of I, pray for us. And it says, pray. The word here, in Greek does some very interesting things, but I'll save you all that lesson and just say, the idea here is to pray continually. Keep on praying for us. It's not, hey, say a quick prayer for us, but rather, hey, keep on praying for us. And it says, we are sure that we have a clear conscience and desire to live honorably in every way. What a weird thing to say. Have you ever read that and thought, well, why in the world did he say, hey, I'm doing a really good job? What in the world is going on? Well, I think that there's 5 basic points to this statement. The first off is he's trying to emphasize the way that he has been an example to the church. Up to this point, he's been an example, which is a good thing. Leaders should be an example, the same thing, because the audience can compare themselves with him. In other words, how are we measuring up to people around us who are leading? Are we headed in that same direction, or are we shrinking back? The third thing, in this way, you could say that the writer of Hebrews is kind of becoming part of those examples of the faith from chapter 11 or whatever, where he's talking about the different hall of faith. In this way, he's kind of establishing himself as, yes, this isn't just something that happened back then, like you worship the saints from before or something, right? This is something that, yeah, there are new leaders. God is raising up new people, and there's good examples if you look for them. There's not just the bad ones. The fourth thing that I think we can get from this little affirmation that he says here is they are striving to go forward rather than remaining where they are. Look how he says this. We have a clear conscience and desire to live honorably in every way. We want to keep on moving forward. We have done well, and we want to keep on doing well. And then the fifth thing is basically to say, this is what's going on with us. You likewise make sure that you're have a clear conscience and desire to live honorably. So it's kind of a way of comparing, like, hey, are you following this same model? Paul would say it like this. So this is Paul writing. He would say, "You've seen my example. Try to do the same thing that you've seen in me." That's kind of how Paul would have worded it, but Paul obviously didn't write this. When we get to verse 19, the last verse we're going to look at, it says, "I particularly urge you to pray so that I may be restored to you soon." And so right here, I just want to focus on two things from this whole "be restored to you." The first is that he is writing this letter and encouraging a church all the while he himself or she is suffering. It's an amazing thing. I don't know about you, but when I go through times of suffering, I tend to get very, very self-focused, withdraw from the world, lock my office door, and kind of leave it at that, and then I have my little pity party, and then I come back, But that's kind of, I think, all of ours. But instead of that, you see him writing this. And it's not a short book. It's not like you wrote like a paragraph. Okay, there, I did my due diligence. Now get out of here. But he actually writes a thoughtful letter, which has been very encouraging, at least in my life, and sends it out all the while he is suffering. That's just an amazing thing. Remember that it's not just because you're going through suffering doesn't mean God can't use you. And just because, and there was a teaching that going along a couple years ago that basically said you can't pour into people if you're. No, it wasn't that. It was. I was going to say you can't pour into people if you're empty, but that's not how they said it. They said you can't heal people unless you're healed. That's how it goes. You can't heal people unless you're healed. That's not true. We see that it is not true from Jesus, from Paul, from the author of Hebrews, all over the place. Now, I would say you need to take care of yourself, and if you're not well, you need to get help. Absolutely. I mean, if there was a bullet wound in your leg, you should probably get that taken care of, right? But don't make the mistake of thinking you have to be 100% for God to use you. That's just silly. And then the second thing about this whole restored thing is this guy or girl or people, they were part of this church. And for whatever reason, they are MIA. They're off and about. So whatever's going on there, pray so that I may be restored to you soon, so I can go back to you guys. So once again, just to give you the summary of what we looked at, the new covenant impacts our relationships, and we've seen that be developed through our interpersonal relationships, our relationships with the leaders, our relationships with God. We've seen all of that kind of come together, and we can kind of close off on this section, and next week we only have 5 verses left, and then we're done with Hebrews. And none of those verses have to do with the body content of Hebrews. It's just kind of closing comments kind of stuff. So any questions about what we looked at tonight?